Well, good morning, or whatever it may be where you are. It's morning here on the Vancouver on the Canadian West Coast, and bitterly cold. It's below freezing, and we're not used to that. I would like to welcome you to the ninth class in the UBC Ecosystem Modeling course called FISH 501. And the topic for today is that I'm going to give you an introduction to the first two tutorials that we've been working on. So tutorial 1 about constructing an ecosystem model from scratch, and then a tutorial about mass balance. Will be a bit more brief, the second one, but the first one I'm going to go through, and I'm going to do the steps that are involved in this. Then following this, we'll take some questions about tutorials and general things about where you are with getting ecosystem modelings up and running and how to work with them. And we're going to then continue by looking at some of the things we can use Ecopath for. What can we deduct from the food web? So that entails network analysis, and it's just going to be a brief introduction to network analysis. There is a presentation on the course website about it, but it is going to be very brief. It's going to include also that Marta Coll will give an introduction to ecological indicators, which is a routine, which includes a routine in Ecopath. And then and we're going to be demoing. Then I will open Ecopath and have a look at the network analysis. So some of the results we can analysis and indicators we can extract just based on the food web. And that should easily take 2 hours. Let's see, I'm a bit optimistic that we can actually get through this in these 2 hours. But let me continue by mentioning that we are here at UBC in Coast Salish territory, and we acknowledge that we thus are based at the traditional, unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish people. Next, let me just mention once again that we have a Slack workspace where you are very encouraged to check it out and to look for ask questions and enter into discussions. If you need it, just let me know and I can arrange for access for you. And I also want to mention that the recordings of these classes are available if you go to the Ecopath YouTube channel and the Facebook page. And finally, that you can find the course website at the link here. So sites Google.com, view FISH 501-2021. Let's go and check out how we do tutorial 1. The tutorial, as I hope you know, is really well explained. So you can work your way through it. And my suggestion for now is that you're welcome to do that as we go along, but it may be better for this one to just follow what I'm doing and then do it on your own if you haven't done so. Actually, even if you have done so, it might be a good idea. So because of some screen resolutions, I can't easily swap to enter it in Ecopath. So I'm going to do the number crunching first, and then I'm going to go to Ecopath and I'm going to be entering the information in there. Yeah, so Anchovy, let's see what information we have here in the tutorial. The first part is that area is 100 square kilometer. That's a number that means something. We'll be using that. So we here create a model of the bay in 1970 with the following 11 groups. Okay, we have 11 groups here. To make it easier, I'm going to copy. We got the names, we got the 5 fleets here. I'm going to go and I'm going to data and text columns, limited, comma, finish. So now I have my 5 fleets. And then let's look at the landings. I'm going to start there, it looks like. The sealers caught 15 seals. So we're going to find seals and sealers equals. It's 15. And remember, one of the really important things about this, it's one of these things, not like real estate, location, location, location. Here, it's units, units, units. So 15 seals, and each of them are 30 kilogram. That's our landings. But now it is in kilogram. So it's divided by 1,000 to make a ton. And then we have to divide it by the area. And the area is 100 square. The under is 100 square kilometers. So we divide it by 100 and we get a number. Next, fishery catches were 35 tons of cod. That's the trawler. So we're going to find cod here. And I'm going to put equals 45. And again, divided by 100. Good. And the next is 20 for whiting. So 20 divided by 100. 0.2. 40 ton of mackerel. That's the seiner. So mackerel is next. Now 40 divided by 100 is 0.4. So I can enter that directly. And 120 ton of anchovy, 1.2 goes in there. And then for the bait boats, it's anchovy, 20 ton, that's 0.2. Now we can do it quickly. And the shrimpers is there, 0.03. Well, 3 divided by 100, we know that now, that's that much. So this is what we need to enter on the landings. Let's continue. Oh, we got prices too. And we need something similar for the prices. So I'm going to copy that over here. Actually, we don't need all of this space here. I'm going to get rid of these 3. And then do it once more. Put the prices here. Anyway, they go down the same way. 6, 10. I know it's per kilogram, and it really is per ton. So I could enter 6,000, 10,000, but just to make it easier, we continue like this and we put it down. 6 and 10. Right, no, 6, 10, 6, macro, 4, so that's like this. Now we have this. Let's continue. Yeah, if you don't have data for your own area, go to Sea Rounders and use what's there, or other statistics. There usually you can find statistics. So we got some survey biomasses from 1970. That's very fortunate. So let's go to Wales. And we're going to now entering biomass, P over B, Q over B, ecotrophic efficiency, EE. Actually, before that, I'm going to cheat a little bit here, and I'm going to put production or consumption, not cheat, but into that in here. So that's just the ratio between POB and QOB, production biomass ratio divided by consumption biomass ratio is POQ. EE, and I think that's about it. So for whales, we have 10, so equals or plus 10. They eat their small, 800 kilogram times small things, times 800, not really whales at 800 kilogram. That's 10 times 800, that's how many kilogram we have in the bay, and we have to change that from kilogram to ton. So that's divided by 1,000. And we need to remember that we have 100 square kilometer, so they have to be divided by that as well. So that's a small number. For seals, it's plus 203 times 30 divided by 1,000 to make a ton, divided by 100 to make it into ton per square kilometer. Cod, we have 300 ton, so that's plus 300, it's ton, so we only have to divide by the area, which is 100. Now we can guess for whiting, 180 tons amounts to 1.8. For mackerel, it's 1.2, 120 divided by 100. Anchovy, 6.4. And shrimp, it's given in ton per square kilometer. And maybe I should remind you, ton per square kilometer is exactly the same as gram per square meter. So 0.16 gram per square meter, that means less than 1 shrimp per square meter. Yeah, okay. It's not a very high biomass, no. Zooplankton, 14.8. Yeah, that's more zooplankton. Then detritus, that's 10. The detritus biomass is not really used for anything. Short of when you get to Ecosim, it's when this display will show detritus biomass relative to this number here. But so this number is not important at all. What matters is how much detritus is, how much flow is into the detritus box, and how much is being, how big the demand is for detritus. The biomass doesn't really. Anyway, this is what goes in here, and we're going to go now to production biomass ratios as the next thing, which corresponds to total mortality. The unit is per year, as we talked about, and we have expectations for these, which we'll get back to. We can get the total mortality or PB value from a sum of the fish mortality set equals fish mortality plus M, the natural mortality. So F we can get from catch and biomass, that's the ratio between the catch and the biomass, and then we add to it the natural mortality. We can do that by going into fish paste now, but given that Deng did this a couple of weeks ago, I'm actually inclined to skip that part. Or should I just go for one species maybe? Maybe I should. I'm just going to do it for one species. Oh. Here. And we want gadders. No, not gads. Oh, come on, what happened? And it's cod we want. No, not morg. More. That's more. Okay. So now we have the cod page in FishBase. And we're going to go down, 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 down. And when we get down here, under Tools, we'll find the Life History tool. When you go a bit up, I'm going to keep my space down there where I need it. So what do we find in here? If we had been working on, if Anchovy Bay had been one of the ecosystems in here, we would go in and see if we have any information that's specific for Anchovy Bay, but it isn't. So let's go down here. We see a natural mortality of 0.21. So we could actually just go in here for cod, and for PB we could say plus 0.21 plus, what's the cats? That's the 0.45. Divide that by the biomass, and we get an estimate of 0.36. So I took the natural mortality, predation mortality, and other mortality, that's the natural mortality of M, estimated to be 0.21 here, and add to that K7 over B7. K7 is the catch, and catch divided by biomass. That's the fish mortality F. So that will give us one estimate for it. There are other ways of doing it. One is this Beltran and Holt equation that is down here under exploitation. That was that's in the Beltran and Holt 1957 book. We could go in here and we can look over here. For cod, there's an estimate of length at first catch, 52, and the mean length in the catch. So if you don't have an estimate but you know about the species, what's the smallest catch you ever see in the market, and what's the average size you see in the market? That can be an indicator. But the routine is really sensitive to these numbers. You can play with them and see how it works. It is a little bit difficult to get some good numbers. What we had here was 52 and 72. So 52 as length at first catch, the smallest you see in the market, and 72 or in the fish catches, but typically that would be like this. Set of 0.2. Oh, 42, 52. No, it keeps changing it. 52. Oh, I have to say recalculate over here. So set of 0.29, that's the total mortality of 0.29. We had 0.36, indicating our fish mortality was a bit higher. That could be because this one, and try it, recalculate, we're a little bit lower there. No, it went the wrong way. Oh, there we are. 0.36. I've got two estimates now that's giving me the same number. If the length of first catch was 56 and the mean length was 72, it will give the same number. So this is where we get two ways to get mortality, and generally what you have to remember of these is the natural mortality rates here is based on empirical equations. It's not precise, it's not cast in stone. The F catch over biomass is two estimates that you divide by each other. It's not precise, but all we're trying to do with this is to end up in the right ballpark. We want to have numbers that can give us a balanced model. We're not looking for the perfect in this. We just need to get started. Then later on, we can go in and we can throw uncertainty at it. There's lots of opportunities for that. But we need a starting point. We need a food web to get going. And your evaluation of that food is important, that what goes in there are reasonable numbers, not crazy stuff. And with a bit more experience for what to look for, you'll get there. So we have a couple of methods here, and that gives us in this case here, we got a POV of 0.36. So let's see, let's cheat a little bit. And
There was in the chat by Sara Pedro. I don't know if she wants to read it or should I?
I can't see it.
Okay, so the question is, how do we calculate fishing mortality for a species that we don't have a biomass for?
If you don't have a biomass, you can't do catch over biomass. So you can't estimate fish mortality in that case. You simply don't know if you're taking a catch from a small catch from a big population, or there's no way of knowing it. When there are some methods such as the CMSY method that somehow magically is able to estimate these things without having good estimates of biomass, but no, we are a little bit stuck there. What I would say is, if you don't have cats, you don't have biomass, or if you don't missing one of those two, you can't use that equation. You have to use other ways, and that may be, for instance, use the Bertrand-Holt equation that we looked at before. Like this one here, estimate set from length at first cast, length at mean, and growth information. That gives you a number, and treat that as an uncertain number and see what comes out of it. Now, in this, and then you have to remember one thing. What we're interested in is not the F as such, it's the total mortality, the P or B, or the set, the set equals P or B. In this case here for cod, that's 0.36 per year. So that's a turnover rate of 0.36 per year. If you invert that, you get biomass overproduction. And that would be just around 3 for this one. 1 divided by 0.36, a little bit shy of 3. That means that the average cod in our system lives for 3 years. And you have to consider, is that reasonable? Well, based on what we have here, that they grow to 56 centimeters and the mean length in the cats is 72 centimeters. Well, then we are talking about cod that are 3 or 4 or 5 years old at that point, depending on how fast the growth is. Where is Anchovy Bay situated? Centuries, so it's in the southern part of the range of cod. So it should be growing a bit faster. Yeah, maybe 3 years is a reasonable estimate for a species like this. In many other areas now, cod are fished strongly, and the average size is more like this in the cats, way too small for cod. That would mean that POB is higher because both M and fish mortality will be higher in that case. POB might be 0.6 in such a situation, indicating that the average longevity is more like 0.6, 1.5 year. So we have expectation of these numbers. They're not just numbers. That's the main thing about them. And qualified guesses are okay. It doesn't need to be hard numbers from assessments or that you use. We can get by without this. So let's go down here and see what it says about it. It actually gives us some POP values. We can take that. For whales, it's 0.05. That indicates 1 divided by 0.05 is 20. The average whale lives for 20 years in our system. Seals get F from cats and M is 0.09. Okay, so plus cats divided by biomass and plus 0.09. Oh, it's a very high one. Yes, it is very high, and that's why model is not going to balance. I was going to surprise you with that later, but because I made a mistake in my entry on purpose, of course. I'm going to find it later, but right now let's just forget that that number is too high. Whiting, no, whale seals is the shrimp POB is 3. So average shrimp lives for a third of a year. That's okay. And benthos, also 3. Zooplankton, mainly smaller cardiac size plankton, POB of 35. Again, for one of it is that for zooplankton, the biggest one, Calnus remarcibus, this size, POB about 7. For the small ones, 1.5 to 2 millimeter, 45. This range here is what we need for zooplankton. And for phytoplankton, we're going to get to that in a little while. That's reference here. And then we go to consumption biomass ratios. For whales, we use 9. They eat a lot. This seals 15 times the biomass per year. And for invertebrates, okay, for invertebrates, we are going to be entering a ratio of 0.25 for as the ratio between production and consumption. Now, what does that mean for QOB? That means that if we take the POB, now instead of making an equation there, I'll just tell you what it means. What we've done here is to say that production is 25% of consumption, and you may remember from the Ecopath consumption pie that we looked at the first class. We break consumption into components: production and unassimilated food, and then respiration. And the production part is 10 to 30% of the consumption. So when you eat a unit, you produce 0.1 to 0.3. That's if you are a fish, at least. It's much less if you're a warm-blooded marine mammal or bird. But generally it means that's 25%, and that's what the POQ is. I put that in because instead of trying to find consumption biomass ratio, I'm getting reasonable POB values down here in the corner. And then I can, let me see if I can get this working. I could down here, these POB values 3, and I can estimate the QOB, or Ecopath will estimate QOB to be 3 divided by 0.25, and that's 4 times 3, 12, and so on. That's reasonable. This here just makes it very explicit that how we got those QB. It's from this assumption here. Okay, finally there's phytoplankton. We can get prime production estimates. We have one here. Prime production is 240 gram carbon per square meter per year. So that's the total production for phytoplankton, 240. I can calculate it here. Plus 240. And it's gram carbon. So we want to convert that to wet weight, and the conversion factor for that is around 9. And this gives us, because it's ton per square kilometer per year, that right away gives us what the production is. Now, that's our total. We need to split that into a biomass and a PB. That split is not really important. What will biomass be then? Plus that one divided by 0. I think I made a mistake. Yeah, it should have been H14. So biomass of 18 and POB of 120 is what can go in there. That will give us this product of 2160. We only use, again, once we get in, Ecopath does the calculations, it doesn't use the biomass and the PB, it uses the product of the two. It doesn't use the biomass and the QB, it uses the total consumption. We enter it like this because it's much easier to interpret the numbers when it's done in this manner. Okay, next is ecotrophic efficiency. How much does your model explain about what happens to the production in it? In this case here, the only place we're going to be entering it is for Bentas 0.6, it says. For the other groups here, like whales, for any of the groups in the system here, we make a long linear equation about its production actually, and we do that for each group. And when you have a set of linear equations, we have to be able to estimate something, and we need one to estimate. We can and we need to estimate one parameter for each group. And the advice is estimate ecotrophic efficiency if you can. You can also estimate biomass or PB or QB, but you really shouldn't, because Ecopath needs to enter something. We need to balance these linear equations. They will not be perfect. It's not just going to be you enter perfect information and it just fits. It's necessary. So actually, if you enter all four, the program will come back and bark at you and say, do you want to, you entered all four, you want to estimate the biomass accumulation. If you say no to that, it will come and ask you, well, do you then want to enter the net migration rate? Because it needs to estimate something. If you say no to that, then it shakes its head and say, what do I do? Because it needs to do something. So the advice is don't enter the ecotrophic efficiency, but let the program estimate it. In this case here, we're putting in 0.6. That is, we're making the assumption that the program estimates, the program describes what happens to 60% of production. And happens to it means, in this case here, that it's either going to be eaten, so predation mortality, or fished. In this case, we don't have any fishing on Bentas, so that the predation is going to be 60% of production. That way, we can estimate from the other groups what is the predation, and the program can then raise that to what the biomass has to be, so that 60% is being used in the system. Straightforward. Okay, finally, there is something about biomass accumulation that needs to be entered, 0.02 and minus 0.05 per year for seals. The missing parameters that I haven't done here for biomass and QB, I can tell you what I roughly had: 0.58, 0.72, 1.2 there, and for QB I have 2.58. I'll show you where I get these from. The QB 3.1, 4.4. Just put them down there so I have them when we start entering them. So back to FishBase, and here in FishBase again we are at into card tools, and then the life history page, which is designed to have information notably for Ecopath input. And you see on here food consumption estimated 2.58 times times the body weight per year, so the cod would be 2.58 times their body weight. That's our Q or B. It comes from well, we have to go in and see where it comes from. It can come from studies, lab studies, or it more likely is from an empirical equation, one developed by Palomares, probably part of, well, for Palomares' PhD work many years ago. So that's what we are looking for. That's where we get the QP value. Now, actually, I had been planning that I was going to be opening this while we were there, but it takes a little while because the logo, it's a nice Valentine Ecopath logo that there. And you can say whatever you will, but Ecopath definitely has the best logos that you can find for. So I love to see that here at this time of year. There's a nice Valentine there. So let's go here. Let's make our model. We are going to go and do file. See, I was out of old habit. I went to this little drop down there, and it looks at the last models I've been running. That's not what we want to do. We want to go file. Oh, not open model. I'm having an issue with my mouse. Let's try again. File. New model. And we can call that oh, what happened now?
Oh, well, maybe while Billy's starting, maybe we can put emphasis on the importance of units and conversion factors. As you went through your example, you can see how easy you can get lost in your units and your surface, and it's very, very important. I always tell my students to keep track of units and write it down, because you know today what you're doing, but in a week when you open your Excel file again, you won't. So that's I think we cannot repeat it enough.
No, we make mistakes. That's unavoidable. When you're dealing with a medium-sized model, let's say 25 groups, you are entering biomass, PB, QP, diets, landings, several hundred numbers that you have to calculate. And you make mistakes. We all make mistakes when we do this. The trick is to find them, and that's what we do through looking at them. And do they look okay? In the sense, is the PB higher for the faster turnovers than for the lower turnovers, and so on. QB similar way. The landings, how do they look? Are they reasonable? That's the kind of things one gets an idea about after a while. But that's what we're looking for. Yes.
Carly has a question. Carly, why don't you read it?
Sure. We can talk about it at another time too, but I was just thinking in the meantime, I had a diet question.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I was just wondering, what situations would you use the import fields, and when would it not, I guess, when would they not all equal 1?
Import is, no, a different way of answering is, what's the area that, oh, there's the Valentine. There you go, cute. What's the area that you're modeling? That area really has to relate to your research questions or policy question that you're addressing, and that decides the area. That should decide the area. Now, when you're looking at, if you're modeling, for instance, an island, and you have the area around that, that's your main, is the fisheries on that island. You will have groups. You may have groups that are important, but my favorite example of this is Azores Islands, where Telmo and Joanna and others have been working on a model that describes the EEZ and the local fisheries there. But there's also tuna fisheries, and tuna are distributed throughout that central Atlantic area. So in the area, in such a model where you have tuna coming in and going, you can't get tuna biology right. You can only do that for those in there. So you may have to have import for that group because they feed part of the year outside of the area. You will have them coming in, you'll have them leaving. What happens to them depends on what happens outside. So when you have import, it's going to be seen by Ecosim as being constant. The group will always always get that because it happens outside your system. And it's always going to get it. If you really want to focus on the tuna, then you need to make a model that covers that area, not just what's in the smaller area, the Azores or whatever area that you're looking at. So that, to me, is the central part of this question.
That helps a lot. Thank you.
Good. Now let's see. We still have someone in the waiting room for quite a while now. Okay, let's try again. File, new model. See if it will do it. Yes, I think it did it. Okay, we got something now. I don't know, can I ask my co-host to look after the waiting room? So now we are in here, and we have one group. We have the detritus group because we need a place to send detritus to. So I go define groups, and I go insert. Okay, I can let them in then from the waiting room.
Really, it's not showing up on my, that anyone's waiting.
Then maybe someone will make you co-host.
Yeah, no, I don't see it either, really.
What? Okay.
Yeah.
But you are the host, Santiago.
Yeah, but
Oh, okay. It's just because it barks at me. I right here on top of, so I move things now. So it's not on top anymore. So now I define something, and I need to get my groups in here. Unfortunately, I can't copy well from, or maybe I can try if I can do it. If I can copy the names. See if paste works. No. See there, it's pasted every other ones. It's a Mac window compatibility issue. Anchovy, and then it was bentos and zooplankton. Phytoplankton, skip that one. That one is detritus. And this one here, we're going to delete. Okay, now phytoplankton is a producer, so that I'm going to check that. This here is also where we define the multi-stanza groups, but we're not going to do that. But if I, for instance, wanted to do it, I just need to write here, say for cod, I could write cod there, and when does it start and so on. We'll do that later, but this is also where you define that. Okay. So now it closes the screen because so many things is happening. Oh, it opened again. So we have the defined groups. This is where the multi-stanza is. That parameter is pretty nice. And now we can go out and we can enter the information. And again, I will have to enter it because
Really, you missed shrimp in the groups?
I missed, sorry?
Shrimp?
Oh, they are important. So let's do that. Define groups. And see, this is what happens when you go from memory. I click on Bentos, insert, double click, shrimp. And that's about it. We save it again. Okay, 0.08, 0.0609. Whoops. Nope. Remember what I put 0.25, 0.25, 0.25 here because, oh, no, wrong place. It's all the way out here. Production or consumption ratio. For these three groups with 0.25, just to illustrate that we don't have an estimate for consumption. We don't bother to find it. You can see now consumption biomass ratio are blanked out. You can't enter them. The only thing we need now is to get this 0.6 in here, and then we have it. So this is the start of it. I'm going to save, even though this thing is so secure, you don't even have to save or do backups or any of that things. I'm never going to quit on you. Oh, it just happened to me. Ooh. Landings. Go to fishery, fleets, and here we define our fleets. We're going to do 5 fleets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah. And they are called sealers, trawlers, seiners, bait, shrimpers. Logic says I should call that one baiters. Okay. Now we have 5 fleets. Go landings. So the landings here are again in ton per square kilometer, and they are entered by fleet and by species. 0.45, 0.2, getting there, 0.4, 1.2. That's it. The other thing we need now, there's a lot of discards and so on, is the diet composition. So we go up here, diet composition, That's going to be modes. Whereas I'm going to start by writing. It's a little bit annoying, I can't just copy it. Control. That's number one. Oh. I need to have a look at my Windows, my tutorial. Have patience for a little while. So these are in proportion, preferably weight, volume, and fishery scientists have been studying this for a century. So generally there's a lot of information about diets. It's one of the easy things to study when you go out there. But it's important. The diets serve several purposes. 4, 5 here. Including that they tell you who does not eat what. If a predator don't eat a group here in Ecopath, they're never going to start eating it in Ecosim. So zooplankton is not going to start eating whales or so on. But it tells you something about the spatial overlap as well between groups. Almost there. Now what's the chance I made a mistake in this? Fair. When you're entering this, you'll see down here below, at the moment, the sum is 0.9 and there's 1 left here. So it makes it's a nice, you can actually see here which ones are wrong. Straight away, that's a nice check. 0.505, 0.45, 0.1, this should be 0.44. No, not that one, that one. And here there's an error too. 0.01. And here something is missing, 0.1 up there. There we are. That's it. So now we have entered all the input parameters, and we're going to go not to Ecosim. Oh, there's a problem for Anchory. That's interesting, but I don't want to go there. I want to see the output. Now that's interesting, that it's Anchory that doesn't. That's the only, no, it's 1.01, so we can easily fix this, because it may be something as simple as increasing the production biomass ratio. They are uncertain, and I don't hesitate at all to go in there and increase that with less than 1%. That would be enough to do it, or we can make it 1.3 instead. Then we're going to get to a reasonable estimate around eutrophic efficiency around 0.9. This is a free change making it more efficient. It doesn't have big impacts on anything. it doesn't increase the demand. So now you see for anchovy we have an EE of 0.924. Now what sticks out in this one here is actually this number up here, 0.89 for seals. Efficiency, oh, and there's something we haven't even entered yet. Forgot that. Other production. In this model here, the whales are recovering from fishing, and it says that they are increasing with 2% per year. So the biomass accumulation rate, not the biomass accumulation in ton per square kilometer, but the one that's a rate, so per year, 2%, that's the biomass accumulation divided by the biomass is 0.02. And the seals, it's minus 0.05. They should have been entered too. Save it again, just to be safe. And let's see what happens now. Basic estimates. Oh, it lowered this. Now the reason for this is that I made a mistake when I entered this in production biomass. I had, on the fly when we entered this, I divided that number, the landings, by 10 kilometers instead of 100 kilometers, just to see what would show up later when we got to this point. But because it's PB, that's too high, it doesn't really matter too much. The real value should have been, for seals it's 0.17. And what's that going to do? See, this one here should have been 0.17. I was trying to be smart by introducing an error on purpose. And I realized that what I've done by that is just confuse it. Now we get computed EE value of 4 for the group seals. What's going on here? Now we can't balance it anymore. So something is definitely wrong now. Let's look for where it is. And the steps I'm going through here is what I always do when I look at the model. I go to output, mortality rates. And I'm probably going too fast. That's the downside of having me do it. See if I can get this thing working. Cannot. Oh. Mortalities. So we go in here. Oh, that's what I did wrong. Ah, it was the landings, of course, I did wrong. Now you can see it. I go in, I look at seals here. And again, I'm happy to tell you that this is the Ecopath master equation you have up here. P or B or Z equals fish mortality rate plus predation mortality rate plus biomass accumulate plus net migration rate plus other mortality rate. So in this case here, the seals 0.17, now that's a reasonable P or B. That means that 1 over 0.17 is around 6 years. The average seal lives around 6 years. Before, the number that was wrong was 0.18, that was average seal lives a year. No. 6 years, yeah, that's reasonable. But then we have a fish mortality rate of 0.739 minus 0.05, and then it has to make other mortality rates minus 0.5 to balance this equation. You can see the equation up on top here for whales, how it should be. 0.05 equals 0.02, and then Ecopath has estimated that then this has to be 0.03, the other mortality, in order to fit, to balance this equation. So down here it is it has estimated this one here to minus 0.15, and it's obvious that's because of the fish mortality rate. What I did is here in landings. When I estimate this number here, I divided by an area of 10 square kilometer instead of 100 square kilometer. This is what the number should have been. And I did this because when you enter, that you make mistakes and they tend to show up later on. The easy thing is when it's orders of magnitude. They're the ones that you can more easily find. It's much more difficult when you're dealing with, like for anchovy. Oh, it's a few percent. Then you have to be, should I squeeze this a bit or push that a bit, or what should I do? That actually is a bit more difficult. So, basic estimates. Now, we have seals and ecotrophic efficiency at 0.14, and we have 0.17 is distributed with 0.07 due to fishing, and then we have a negative biomass accumulation rate because the seals are being culled, so they're going down here in the 1970, and then we have an unexplained mortality of 0.15, which is reasonable. So that's our model, and this is what it takes to do tutorial 1. I hope you made your way through it. If not, then I strongly suggest you do it, because you really get a sense of what goes into constructing a model and where the buttons are and so on. Okay, I'm going to talk briefly about network analysis, and Marta is going to be talking a little bit about the ecosystem indicator plugin that we have for Ecopath. The thing about network analysis is it's pretty neat that you can deduct information about the status of an ecosystem just from a quantified food web. That is neat, I really think so. But you have to remember, though, that's the no over there, that it's not the tool if you want to ask policy questions, or many policy questions, I should say. You need dynamic models to answer those. What happens if? The what if questions generally have to, no, the what if questions have to be answered with dynamic models. Still, there's a lot you can deduct from just from the network, and indicators is a key part of it. So things that relates to ecosystem structure are something that a food web, a flowchart, quantified flowchart is really good at addressing that kind of questions. And there are lots of things happening in theoretical ecology that deals with networks and the inherent properties of how such networks develop and the characteristics and so on. Ecological modeling and the International Society for Ecological Modeling is definitely the place to go if you want to dive more deeply into that. So there is a thriving community around this. And I put in the 42 here because it's a reminder of something I talked about in the very first class, that the thing about indicator that we have to be aware of is that they give us the answer, but not the question. So we have to figure out what do they actually tell us. And that's pretty intriguing. I put this thing up here is the front page of a PhD dissertation from some years ago that was kind of fun to work with. I'm sorry, 41 models, not 42 models is what we had that we studied in this analysis. So just a few of the key concepts and analysis that are involved. One aspect of this is trophic levels, which we estimate from diet compositions, and we're using fractional trophic levels. This is actually something that goes back to E.P. Odom's son. E.P. Odom is one of the biggest ecologists ever. I talked briefly about him and his brother H.T. Odom in the very first class. Now, E.P. Odom had a son called William, he became a faculty at the University of Virginia, but unfortunately died when he was just 40 years old. He developed the concept of fractional trophic levels. Before that, going back to Lindemann before him, they used integer trophic levels. So you had trophic level 1, you had the producers and detritus, and trophic level 2, the first order consumers, and so on as you go up. But when we have a system, but in the system here, as defined by William Odom, the trophic level of a group is the average trophic level of its prey plus 1. And typically, yeah, we have about 4 trophic levels in marine ecosystem, but pathways can be much longer, but it's the average that matters. Cycling is another aspect. Reminds me of the of E.P. Odom's ecosystem maturity, where he defined 24 indicators for how a system develops. We talked about that before. One of those indicators is cycling. That when you get to a more mature system, you expect that there'll be more cycling materials. You know, in the beginning, it's a free for all. The resources are there, the nutrients are there. You come in and you grow fast, you die young, and gradually this changes because of recycling into the opposite. It's long-lived things that dominate later on as the system gets more mature. Now we can estimate the Finn's cycling index or the cycling index by just looking at the flow through such a system as this, how that moves over time. So we have, if in this case here we have 50 energy units coming in and we have 50 coming from over here. So there's 100 going up to this group. We follow the fate of it, and these standardized drawings here are made so that this earth signal here, grounding signal, that's respiration, that's the thing that is lost. The 20 up on top is how much is passed on to the next trophic level, and in this case here 50 goes from A over to B, very hypothetical. So it goes in there, and there's 50 other ones coming into B as well. And then part of this, of B, is being eaten by A. So we have a cycle there. A eats B and B eats A. And we can calculate, when we can define these pathways, we can define what that means for what the cycling is. An Ecopath will look at the food web and it will estimate all the pathways, all the cycles based on the connections, the linkages, based on the diet composition. That's what it boils down to. And that's actually a pretty neat analysis. So, traffic aggregation is the next thing you can do here. When you have a group like this where you have A, B eats A. So in this case here, we can estimate, by the way, that the trophic level of B is 2. This is a fractional trophic level. Now C eats B and A in equal proportions. Therefore, the average trophic level of C's prey is 1 plus 2 divided by 2. That's 1.5. And you add 1. Average trophic level plus 1, that's the trophic level of a group. Good. Now when we have this, we can also look at what about the flows. And we can get back to the integer trophic levels this way. It's a trophic aggregation we're talking about. So in this case here, all of A will go to trophic level 1. All of B will go to trophic level 2. But C eats on both trophic level 1 and trophic level 2, so half of it will go to trophic level 2 and half of it to trophic level 3. Straightforward when you have this simple hypothetical system. But when you're dealing with a big complex food web, you need some help. And that's what you get from Ecopath will estimate these things. We build in a lot of these network analysis, primarily based on Babuljanovich's book Growth and Development from 1986. Much of what he put into that book, which is an incredible book, is in Ecopath. Now, when you have aggregation, as you see it here, this also means that you can estimate trophic transfer efficiency. So in this case, what we're looking at, how big is the flow from A to B, and how big is the flow from, well, A to B, from trophic level 1 to trophic level 2, and from trophic level 2 to trophic level 3. And then we define the trophic transfer efficiency as the ratio between flow out of a trophic level to flow into that trophic level. So in this case here, it's the 20 divided by the 120, and that's 16%. Generally, what we find from having looked at many ecosystems is that typically the trophic transfer efficiencies are around 10% by trophic level, which is actually what Raymond Lindemann got when he looked at his bogs in Minnesota from his study, around 10%. And that rule seems to stick, that for each trophic level you lose 90% due to respiration and other losses. Only 10% is moved on to the next trophic level. We can define that with Lindemann spline, as you see it here, which is a complicated creature, pretty neat stuff though, but it, as you can guess from it, it goes back to Raymond Lindemann. And so it shows from producers and detritus how the flow is up through the food web and what happens to it, what the fate is, and neat summaries of it. You can also do that separately for what happens to detritus, what happens to producers, and so on. We have used this to estimate primary production required, which is a kind of a measure for the impact. It's actually exactly the same as Bill Rees's ecological footprint. Bill Rees was a faculty I should explain for you, those of you who are far away from, or not at UBC, that we are at the Institute of Ocean Fisheries in a building called the Aquatic Ecosystem Research Laboratory, second and third floor, first floor. On fourth floor, we have an institute called IRES, Institute for Resource, Environment and Sustainability, where Bill Rees was a professor, and he developed the ecological footprint concept, which is just the opposite of the prime production required. It's the inverse of that. And it is the approach for describing, for instance, what's the ecological footprint of London? How big, how much area is needed to feed London? That's the ecological footprint. We are estimating with this the prime production required. And that concept is just the inverse of it. How much of the prime production do we take out of an area through our fisheries? It doesn't mean that we impact everything below, because if we are fishing, taking out some tunas, they need a lot of prime production to be sustained. But it is a complete parallel to the ecological footprint. And it actually comes from H.T. Odum, the other Odum brother, the bigger brother, the one who was into energy. The two worked closely together. Now, he had something that he called transformative factor, and he developed a concept about energy. And basically what he did is, when you have a food chain like you see it on the left here, you have 100 units going from trophic level 1 to 2 and then 10 and then 1. He calculated what this corresponds to, and that's our prime production required factors, to this transformative factor. And he, based on this, estimated, by multiplying the flow times the transformative factors into energy. Energy is embodied energy. He would get in this case here that, well, it's 100 everywhere, because in this stylistic, idealistic food web, whatever you want to call it, the energy is conserved. he was actually then transferring this back to solar radiation equivalence, which goes to show that between these three concepts, HT Odoms, which is not used much outside theoretical ecology, to primary production required, which has some take-up, to ecological footprints, which is the concept. It certainly goes to show that how you communicate things and how you express things is really important. And by far, the ecological footprints, that's what is. That's what can capture the imagination. So that's a good example of this. Enough about that. And yeah, let's turn to a really interesting analysis, which we are going to demonstrate to you in a little while. Mixed traffic impact. This is a routine that goes back to, let me just explain what it is first, and then I'll tell you about the origin of it. So we have in this case here that group B feeds on group A and group C feeds on group B. So we ask the question, what is the impact of B on A and of C on B? Well, we would say here B has a negative impact on A and C has a negative impact on B because C eats B and B eats A. That's straightforward. Now from this we can deduct what's the impact on C on A. We would say, oh, that's going to be a positive impact as a minus times minus. And we can capture that in our head because if you had a little bit more of C, if C increases in biomass, they would suppress B, there will be fewer of B. Oh, and that means lower grazing pressure on A, or predation pressure on A. So yeah, C has a positive impact of A. That's straightforward. But this is not how food webs look. They look like this. C eats A as well. Now, what is the impact of C on A? That's more difficult to get into our heads. This is where economic input-output analysis comes in. And it was developed by an economist. What's it? His name will come to me. He got the Nobel Prize in 1951, I think it was, for describing this economic input-output analysis. He made an analysis of the American economic industries and brought everything together in one analysis that showed the impact of one sector on basically all other sectors. And name just come on, what's his name?
Leontief?
It was Leontief, of course. Yeah. I was getting confused here because I was Lindemann. Leontief came back to me and I thought that was ecology. No, it's of course it's Leontief. Thank you. You got a gold star, Santiago. So Leontief described this, and later on Uljanovic and colleague who it was, Pukia, I think, they developed this into ecology. The main difference being that in Leontief's input-output analysis, it's a two-way flow. If I buy something from you, I get these resources and you get money back. So it takes this two-way. But if it's in ecology and I eat you, you are not going to get anything back, short of there'll be some nutrients coming back and going around, detritus and that kind of things. That's the only kind of feedback. There's no direct feedback. So Uljanovic and Pukia developed a way of getting that into that analysis into to do it based on food webs, and we have that it's a really, really neat analysis in Ecopath, networks analysis. When you look at this, you have to remember that it's static. So it cannot answer what-if questions, but it can make you think of what-if questions. You can think of it also in this way. What would happen if you make an infinitesimal small change in the biomass of a group? Very small biomass, because we are looking at a static situation, but it tells you something about the direction of change and the strength of change. Now, in this case here, if we look at this plot over there, then red means negative impact and blue means positive impact. And we can look across and we can compare then these impacts. The darker they are, the stronger the impact. So in this, if you look at the second one here, seals. Well, what happens if we had a little bit more seals? There are only two big impacts. One is they compete with themselves. So there's a big red dot here from seals impacting seals. And there's a big positive impact on the sealers. So the fleets are in here as well. Yeah, seals, more seals means, well, it's good for the sealers. But in this model here, seals do not have a big impact on other groups. Whereas if we go down and we look at the whales, they on top there, they have positive and negative impacts, but rather faint colored compared to anchovy. If you go down there, you'll see anchovy has a strong positive impact on foragers because they feed on anchovy, they fish anchovy, a positive impact on phytoplankton and a negative on zooplankton. And they compete with themselves and they have a positive impact on whales that eat them. Now, in many cases, you can deduct these what happens here by looking at the strengths. But you can only do that for a few steps, like we're showing it here. I'm showing it here. When you get in here, it gets much more complicated. But we've had this analysis around throughout the time where we've had Ecopath, and have looked at this for many, many systems, and found that wherever you can follow it with your head, it makes sense. And then sometimes some impacts are surprising, they go further beyond. Like we'll find beneficial predation, as Sheila Heymans called it, where a predator can have a positive impact on its prey because it's actually taking a lot of the competitors. So this analysis here is really good for getting an idea about what these indirect effects are. So when you're sitting there and you have to find something for a discussion after you made your model and you're only going to publish the Ecopath model, so you have to think about something to use it for, look here, because, or you could look here, because this is actually good for generating the thoughts about what if questions, what might happen if. You can hypothesize with this here. And Simone Libraletto took this and he looked at it, and then he went to Ecosim and he tested those out, and he found that there was a very, very strong correlation between what this indicates and what Ecosim shows you. When you run these things in Ecosim, such as what happens if you fish harder on cod, what would the impact be throughout the ecosystem. That's what this is good for thinking about. All right, we're getting there. Just a few more things. Ulyanovich works a lot with ascendancy. I'm not going to go into it, but deals with growth and development. If you want the full explanation, Growth and Development is the title of Bob Uljanovich's 1986 book, which is heavy reading. But ascendancy is a central aspect of that. There's keystones. Not all species, not all ecosystems have keystones. There are 4 different measures for how to calculate that in Ecopaths. That's another little area. And dynamic indicators is a pretty neat thing. Most of those who work with network analysis, the general thing there, if you look in theoretical ecology journals, type publications, notably ecological modeling, you'll find that they deal with a food web, like we saw it here, we actually built those into, so they are also being estimated in the dynamic modules, Ecosim at least. So you can estimate what happens over time with many of these indicators. And that's pretty neat. Indicators are important. We need a way of summarizing ecosystems, what happens in ecosystems. And we basically need indicators for that, just like we do in all other aspects, economy included. This next step is then a plugin. And Marta, can you tell us about this?
Yes, sure. Do you want me to share my screen or just?
Yes.
I just have here.
I stopped sharing here, and I'm looking for. Yeah.
Okay.
You should be able to.
Yeah. Oops. Let me see. Share. Can you see my presentation? See.
Yep, all good,
Yes, we see
Marta.
it.
Okay, good. So basically, what I'm going to pick up on what Billy was saying, that we need indicators to compare the results of what we're getting from these models, and as you will see when you start exploring Ecopath and later Ecosim and Ecospace, there's a lot of information coming from these models. Information that comes from the functional groups that you have in the models, information that will give you ideas about system metrics, how your ecosystem works. So you can go from all the way from functional groups to the systems. And there's many ways to use them. However, there's some are dispersed in the program, and many more can be computed from results of Ecopath and Ecosim and Ecospace. So normally what we tend to do, people that work a lot with indicators, is you save your results and then you calculate them in an R script or an Excel file or whatever you are more confident with. The problem there is that then you can calculate the same indicator in different ways. That happens with the trophic level, that happens with biomass ratios, etc. So this work that I'm showing you here was motivated by the first word here, standardized. So it was a way to provide a plugin to standardize calculation of the most simple indicators that you can calculate from Ecopath, Ecosim, and Ecospace. And the good thing is that you can add many more to this plugin. So this plugin can be open up and you can compute new ones, you can program new ones. This paper is in your additional readings if you want to go into the paper. But basically, it gives you the opportunity to calculate quickly indicators that are related to biomass, or are what we call biomass-based indicators. You have them here on the top. Catch-based indicators, trophic-based indicators, and then also size-based and species-based indicators. And I have to caution you, though, that these size-based indicators are a bit tricky because they don't really, as you know, Ecopath and Ecosim and Ecospace are not based in size. So the indicators just show proportions of biomass and how they change, but they don't change sizes. So be careful when you use those. Okay, and it's also explained in the paper. So the important thing to know is that you find this plugin under tools, and it's a per default plugin. So it comes with you when you install your program. Then you go to tools, and it's called Ecological Indicators, and you can run it in Ecopath, in Ecosim, in Ecospace. You can run it with Monte Carlo. You have several options. Another warning is that don't turn them all on when you are running quickly your models, because if you turn Ecopath, if you turn Ecospace, every time you do a run in Ecospace, it will calculate all the indicators that are here listed in space and in time. So you're going to have your model really going slow in calculating all these indicators. So that's a warning, because I have been impairing my hard disk sometimes, just forgetting about turning this off. And especially if if you turn these automatically save CSV files, then you are done for a while with your computer. So be careful with that. But when you do that, before doing that, what you need to do, so you can see here, sorry, some of these indicators tell you information about fish or invertebrates or demersal parts of your system, pelagic. And in the basic Ecopath, and the model doesn't know what is a fish or an invertebrate, or just knows who is a primary producer and who is a consumer, but nothing else. Well, it also knows trophic levels, etc. But they don't know if it's a fish or an invertebrate, where it lives, if it's endemic, if it's under risk, etc. So this is something that you need to provide to the program. To do that, first though, you need to define taxonomy. Taxonomy means that in each functional group, when you parameterize your model, you group your species per functional group. Imagine that you have small pelagics, and in a small pelagics you have several species. You may have sardines and anchovies, and you have done your calculations to provide the average data, biomass, consumption, production, catches per your functional groups. But if you want these species to be picked up in the indicators I'm showing you, you need to go into define taxonomy, and you need to, per group, need to define which species are in those functional groups. Okay. You don't need to do that for all the groups. You can do it. For example, imagine you are interested in your fish groups or your fish and macroinvertebrates, and you don't want to provide, or you don't have the information for your plankton groups. That's fine, as far as you know what you're providing, because then that will condition how you calculate your indicators. Okay. You also have here the option to not to include information about species in your functional group, but that you want that functional group to be taken into account in your indicators. What you do then is just to create a taxonomic group that is called various species, and that you could edit after. Because after you creating your defined taxonomy, you go to something that is called species traits, that is under Ecopath input traits. And there is a table where you can add all the information, extra information that the plugin needs to calculate some of the indicators. So here we have, you can tell which type of organism we have in those species. They are fishes, invertebrates, marine mammals, turtles, etc. The ecology, so if they are demersal, pentapelagic, pelagic. The occurrence status, if they are native, they are invasive, etc. Endemic. The proportion, here you have the proportion of biomasses and catch. And here basically what we add is information on how the proportions of those species within the functional group. You may have functional groups that are quite homogeneous, or so that the proportions are quite equal between species, but you may have functional groups where you have one species that is dominant and the other ones that are really a minority. So that can be also taken into account. Then you have also information about the EUCN conservation status. So for those species that you have data, you can go into the status reports and add if they are EUCN species at risk or not, least concern, vulnerable, at risk of extinction, etc. Then for those species that are exploited, you can also add the exploitation status. They are fully exploited or overexploited or underexploited. And then you have the vulnerability index, which is an index on how vulnerable a species. I think it's available under fish base, in fish base and sea life base at the end of the page per species, and it's a way to identify how vulnerable those species are to fishing. You can also add that here, and then you have indicators about the length and the span, the lifespan of the species that you can also get from fish base. Okay, so this is where you add your traits, and then you go into your ecological indicator. You load your plugin, and then you start getting all these indicators. The interesting thing is that you can, for example, use this to compare the same model in different time periods. So it's very interesting if you have constructed a model of your current time, and then you construct a model of somewhere in the past, and you want to see how your ecosystem has changed, then you can run this plugin to compare those time steps. And you can also go into Ecosim. We have been seeing how we feed a model to data, how we drive it. Then we get these indicators, all the indicators that I showed you in a time series. Okay, so here, for example, you have the biomass-based indicators, you have the total biomass, commercial biomass, fish biomass, etc. And you can save them. So you have save to CSV, and then you can plot them in R or another program that you like. The interesting part as well is that this plugin responds to the Monte Carlo simulation. The Monte Carlo simulation is a routine where you can sample the parameter space of the initial conditions of your Ecopath model, and then runs multiple Ecosim models and save them as well. So if you, for example, here you could run 100 or 1,000 simulations, and then what this does is computes the indicators taking into account all those runs from the Monte Carlo. Okay, so Monte Carlo will look for balanced solutions, alternative balanced solutions of your Ecopath model, will save them, and then when it has found a balanced solution, will run Ecosim. Okay, this plugin is just also calculating all those indicators, and you can also save them. What is also very interesting is that while using the Monte Carlo, what it does here is basically in the initial step of an Ecopath model, because you find an alternative balanced solution of your Ecopath, it computes all the indicators at the initial Ecopath. So you can also use this plugin as a way to look at the uncertainty of the indicators in your Ecopath model. So here you see this is a histogram of the indicators at the initial step of your Ecopath. So that would be at the initial step of your Ecosim run. Okay, and then you can find an idea of how what is the uncertainty, what is the error around those indicators. And finally, you can also run this with Ecospace. So it will compute all those indicators from your Ecospace run. So you run your Ecospace model, you come back here and you have all those indicators computed for you. Okay, and then you can also save them. What is important is that if you have the autosave mode, the program is going to save all these indicators in space and time. So it's going to save a map per each time step, per each indicator. So you can see that you can generate quite a lot of data in just one run, on a couple of runs. And it's very powerful, but it's also very consuming in terms of it's quite hungry in terms of a space for your computer. So just be careful, but it's you can save all these maps and then load them in a ArcGIS or another program and compute additional indicators, do average of maps, regional averages, whatever you want. Yeah, that's basically it. Yeah. So that's everything I had to explain, Billy.
Thank you. That's really neat. And Marta, two things. One is, would you send me your presentation or PDF so I can put it on the website?
Yeah.
And so it will be there in an hour or so.
Yeah.
The second thing is, it's actually really neat also that you get into the level of uncertainty of indicators. Has anyone ever seen what is the uncertainty on the GDP estimates that we are basing so much on here in everywhere, basically? No, I haven't. So
yeah, that was one of the
indicator is neat. Yeah,
it's one of the motivations that like drive us to write this plugin, first to standardize some of the indicators, and then you have all the trophic levels there, for example, standardized for you, but also to be able to play a little bit with uncertainty.
Yeah. Now we are running out of time. We must have talked too much. Marta, we talked too much. Yes. So,
sorry.
so
If I can add to what Billy was saying, you can, with what we showed you today, you can easily get your anchovy bay model and try to find all the indicators that we showed you today, because they are all there. You can explore your mixed trophic impact, your keystone indicators, your flows, and that's pretty neat when you invest all this time to develop a model. Finally, the click button to find the indicators is quite an exciting moment. So I invite you to go ahead.
we are, with regard, Kathleen has a question about what ways we can estimate uncertainty, noting that we have seen several methods already. And yes, we are going to be spending a couple of hours answering that question. It's going to come later when we get into the later part of the course, not because it's more advanced, but because the first thing is to do the analysis. The second thing is to throw uncertainty at it. And yes, there are quite a number of different ways of doing that. It's well integrated into the approach. So I would prefer that we just come back to that a bit later.
We could give a hint by saying that there is a plugin that follows on this EcoInt plugin that is called Ecosampler, which allows many more analysis on uncertainty. So if you are really keen on uncertainty and you cannot wait for the class, I think there is one of the readings, additional readings that you have is the Ecosampler plugin. Just explore it.
And that was Jerome who was first author of that one, I think.
Yes.
Was it you or Jerome?
No, it was Jeroen, yeah.
Yeah, so Steenbeck. If you'll find it in the publications, and you should all have access to the collection of papers. If you don't, then just send me an email, or look at the Slack channel. There is I think on general, on introduction there is a link to a folder with about 900 publications. Holton has a question about mixed trophic impact. Does it incorporate density dependence? No, there's no density dependence in this, because density dependence, you don't see that in a static food web. This is a dynamic property. So this is when things change, that how much things change is density dependent. That's where it comes in. So it really depends on where the individual groups are relative to their carrying capacity.
If I can add really something about indicators, what we have learned a lot with the years and applying them is that you have to be careful with indicators, especially when you compare them between models. That's something that you're going to read quite a lot if you go into the literature, is because quite a lot of these indicators are dependent on the structure of how you define your food web and your links, your number of functional groups. So you have to be, when you compare models, you have to make sure that those models are comparable, or those indicators are robust to the differences between the models. That's something that you're going to be finding in the literature quite a lot.
Adding here, just remember that the simplest model that can address a question is the best model to use. So it's not so that Ecopath is good and Ecosim is more complex and therefore better, and Ecospace is even more complex and therefore best. It really is almost the other way around, that the simplest model that you can use to address a question is the best model. And things that relates to ecosystem structure, or things that can be deducted from the food web, are best analyzed that way. So all of the different tools, models, have a place and have a use. It's not, what I'm saying, when we're critical about things in network analysis, it's because it's not for what-if questions, it's not for dynamic questions. There you need a model that can do that. And if it's spatially explicit questions, you need a spatially explicit model to address those questions, unless you can find a shortcut to make it spatially implicit. So keep that in mind. And Sarah is asking about QB and PP. How do we adjust for species that is in the model area just part of the year? Basically, you don't. You put in the same PP and the same QP no matter how much of the year they are. With regards to QB, then you may have to have more input. So you may have birds in your model of Anchovy Bay, and the birds, if they feed on land for a good part of the time, then your assumption would be that they import the food into your ecosystem, and that they will always be able to import that because you don't model it. So what do we do when we don't model it? We have to assume it's constant. If it's really important, then you have to do something about expanding and include the terrestrial part too, or expand your ecosystem. That's a general answer. For PP, it means that, well, if those birds are being killed by hunters when they are up there, you won't see that. But if you know about this, you will know that, oh, that means that the ecological efficiency shouldn't be that high because we don't include that mortality source into the model. So you just have to think about it. You have to know your system and reflect that into the model. Then there's no issue with this. All right. We're 2 hours into it. We don't have any questions waiting as far as I can see, which basically means that we are going to stop the class